Hello and welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Tom Levine, and today we're going to be talking about tracking compensation and how to use your census through Excel, specifically how to submit under 50 size group quotes to our Cornerstone departments down here. Now, we also are joined by Kyle Wolf, who is off screen, but he's here to answer any sort of question you might have as things come up. So without further ado, let's get into some bookkeeping items or housekeeping. First, if you have a question, please feel free to type it here into the question box. We'll answer any questions here at the end of the presentation. Also, under that should be a handout section, and we do have a few handouts for you as well. If you would like to go ahead and download those, we will need them later on in the presentation. The first is our data worksheet, and the second one there is also the commission tracker that we'll be referencing later. Also, don't forget to connect with us online as well. If you have any questions that are not able to be answered or that you don't feel comfortable answering or asking during this presentation, feel free to reach out to me directly at the number displayed on your screen or send me an email at tlevine@crnstone.com. Just please be sure to include our subject line Tech Tuesday. I do filter by subject line. Additionally, we have our new AGB portal. If you're not signed up, you probably want to. It's our digital broker suitcase, and it gives you access to your commission statements as well as certain information regarding your clients. So it's pretty useful to sign up. And last bit of bookkeeping here. Don't forget you could earn up to $7,000 with Cornerstone's cash incentive program. You earn more when you sell more, and you are eligible, or at least all sales for group and individual between January 1st of this year, 2023, and December 31st of this year, 2023, are eligible to earn you points to get you closer to that $7,000 cash prize. Feel free to register at www.crnstone.com/cash-incentive-program as displayed on your screen, minus the exclamation mark. So like I was saying, we have renovated our group census, and this is kind of what it looks like. You can request the form from your Cornerstone representative. You can then return it to your area's inbox and just wait for your quote's return. That quote will be sent back to you, and you can use that as well to show your clients. Kyle will be talking about that a little bit more here in a moment. But just some general notes before we get started, and I kind of show you this new form. The first thing you want to do when you open the file is to enable macros. That is actually displayed here in that ribbon up above, which I'm going to circle right here. And that's just what you'll need to do before you actually gain access to the worksheet. Then you can fill out all the prerequisite information for a quote, save the file, and send it back to your group's specific area. That actually will be provided after I show you this as well, so stay tuned. But let's go ahead and actually take a closer look at this census. Here, I'm gonna pull it up right now. All right, here we go. And the first thing you're going to normally have to do is to enable macros. That is the first thing you'll normally have to do. For my screen, it's actually not displaying it because I have this marked as a trusted workbook. You should get a notice when you open it up to request to be made a trusted workbook. And if you're going to be using this for several other carriers or just several quotes, you might want to do that as well. The first page, however, once you enable macros, should be this carrier quote requirements page. Now, this just kind of walks you through some of the minimum requirements for quoting different types of cases, as well as different types of plans, specific requirements as well. Then we get into our first real change, which is the quote request form. If you've worked with this before, you've probably seen something like it from our current request form. It has the effective date, the group's name, tax ID if you know it, and address and things of that nature. However, as you can see, some of these are marked with a red little triangle right up there in the upper corner. This triangle actually specifically refers to what type of cells are required. If I scroll over it, you see the note pop up that says required for submission. If there's no data listed here, then your document will actually not save. Just to show that, I'm going to go ahead and remove this current carrier information listed, then go to File and hit Save. As you can see, we got a pop-up. It says current carrier must be filled in before saving cell C16 on quote request form. If I look at the form itself, column C, row 16 is the one that we just deleted. It will give you a notice like this for every required cell that you leave blank. So if you do not actually fill in this information, then it will not quote correctly, and it won't let you save the document. Because of that, I'd recommend actually having your census fully saved and set aside before you try to submit this quote request. Additionally, don't forget to mark what type of quote you're actually looking for, be that medical fully insured ACA, basic life and AD&D, voluntary life. Just make sure you have all of the lines of business that you'd like quoted selected here, which have the red corners in the upper right-hand side, are required for submission. What that means is if you don't have this box filled out, the form won't let you save. I removed the SIC code previously, and if I go to File, Save, or Save As, then it'll give me an error and say that cell isn't filled in. If I do fill in information here, though, and it can be anything, it can be like 45222 or 55, and then hit File, Save, it'll actually save the document. So before you fill out this quote template and before you get too far into it, you want to make sure that you actually, have all of this information filled out before you copy over a census. Additionally, when you download it, there is a orange ribbon up in here. That ribbon is actually what lets you select to enable macros, and you're going to want to do that before you move on with using this worksheet. It's actually required the first time you launch it. Either way, once you have that form filled out, you can go ahead and put all of your census information into this worksheet. The areas that you can enter into are pretty much all outlined here. There's last name, first name, relationship, EE status, date of business, or date of birth, sorry, sex, tobacco user, yes or no, and things of that nature. Some of these cells, however, are actually enforced to be one type of entry or another. Let's look here at cell M10. As you can see, there is a drop-down. If the client wants dental coverage, they can hit yes. If they're waiving it, you can hit W for waived, or if they're not eligible, you can hit NE. You can also leave the cell blank. If you enter in anything else into the cell, however, like let's just say yes, hit enter, then it's going to say this cell value doesn't match data validation restrictions defined for this cell. And that just means you can't enter that into the cell. And hit cancel, and it'll clear. If you do like typing, however, you can do that. Just hit Y, enter, and because Y is available from the drop-down list, it'll work. Once you have that filled out and send it in to us, you should also get a quote back, and it'll look something like this. Here, we're going to open it up now. Okay, this is what our quote will look like when you receive it, and I'm going to hand it over to Kyle to talk a little bit about it. So why don't you go ahead?
Hey everybody, so just want to give you some information on this this quote that you're going to be receiving back. We've been utilizing this for a little while now, maybe 2 years, so you should be familiar with it, but this is our FormFire quote. It comes directly out of FormFire. We use the information that you input into that census to spit this quote out. And we will typically quote a specific profile, typically the most common plans that we see, unless you ask for something else, and we can for sure quote those as well. When this comes out, it is displayed in order from cheapest to most expensive plans. So you're not going to see all the MMOs at the beginning and then all the Anthem. It's going to be how it's priced based on the quote type. So if you could go to the second tab there and scroll down just a little bit more. So on that second tab there, it's really helpful because it shows you all of your employees and their dependent elections and how much it costs per age band or composite. Now, just to keep in mind, MMO, they do age banded only. So the composite rates aren't necessarily accurate. And same with UHC, they do age banded up to 10 enrolled. So the composite aren't accurate, but the way it breaks down is exactly correct as you would get it in a quote from the carrier. What's really nice about these quotes is if you scroll up just a little bit more, you can see the actual benefits in each of these plans, which is really, really nice. So you don't necessarily have to download a benefit summary, but you certainly can if you scroll all the way up to the top. In those hyperlinks, you can click those and download your benefit summary. At the front of this, you can actually input your current plan and your renewal plan, and it basically builds your spreadsheet for you. So like I said, this is going to be a great quote for you guys. We've been using it for quite a while. We know our brokers like this. And on top of that, our new quoting requirement, where it doesn't let you save until you add in all of the required information, that is super important. It helps us get all the right information that we need right at the beginning so we don't have to bug you and ask you continual questions about what's missing. And I see we have a question here. Does MMO offer composite rates on their ACA product? I don't believe they do. I think it's age banded all the way. So anyway, I'll take this and give this back to Tom.
All right, thank you very much. And if you have any other additional questions about this process at the end of the presentation, I'll be more than happy to hand it over to Kyle to answer those. I'm going to go ahead and put some links up here actually in the chat box as well. Those links will include our email links for where to contact and where to send that quote form that I was showing off earlier by area. We're going to put it up here in the chat box. And I'm also going to actually link something else that'll be useful for the slide I'm about to show. Each of those are links to some review on Excel. And the reason that we're going to want to have those, or at least you might want to save those links, is because when we get into how to actually do some of this stuff that we're going to show you today, it'll be helpful to have that information. One moment. Okay, and like I was saying before when I was a little bit muted, when you open up the worksheet, it'll look something like this for the quotes. You just hit enable content up here and it'll give you access to the full quote template. So first, some prerequisites about what we're going to be doing today regarding how to actually make a compensation tracker. You're going to probably want to know at least these things. It's prerequisites and kind of air quotes, things you probably should know before we get into the presentation. And if you don't know about how to, access these, please feel free to review some of the previous Tech Tuesdays that I've linked. Also, if you'd like to learn more about some of the formulas we're going to talk about today, please feel free to download that formula tutorial Microsoft XLSX file. I included that, but it's actually available from the help section of Excel as long as you're using a version from, I believe, 2019 forward. What it does is it walks you through how these sort of formulas can work, how you can modify references, how you can do all of these kinds of things, and it does it in a really good way. Microsoft does try to make sure everyone kind of understands basically how to use their products, and this is Microsoft's training. So if you look at my note tab and you're not really sure how to interpret things, and you just feel you need a little bit more help directly with how to use formulas, that's a good worksheet for you. Also, there might be some information that would be good to know before we get into this. It's not 100% required. Like I said, I'll be going through all of this anyway. But if you have some general understanding of formula syntax, being how to use dollar signs and colons as well as commas in formulas, that'll be helpful. Also, number formatting is going to be pretty helpful for you as well. And text functions like text to column or concatenate are also going to be used. So if you have any knowledge about how that works, it's going to be useful. But let's go ahead and actually open up the two Excel files that we need for this presentation. The first one is sample data, and the second one is sample tracker. We're actually going to be talking about sample tracker first, so I'm going to go ahead and open that. If you follow along through this sheet, then this sample tracker is going to be what you get to take away from it. It's going to be useful for how you track your clients, how you track your information. All you have to do is put in the proper policy and line of business information, as well as the pay type information into this worksheet. It's laid out pretty much how I like to lay out my trackers if I were doing something like this myself, without the aid of something like our program that we use here in the office, AGB. Or using any sort of database, really. It's useful if you have a small group of clients that you're just trying to track. You don't want to pay for extra tracking software, and you just feel like you can track it yourself. We're going to go through some of the header information that I've included, the first one being the policyholder name. Now, this could be for individuals, this could be for groups, but it's just the moniker that they go by that you know, okay, if I see something named this, that corresponds to this group. After that, I also include the carrier information. That is absolutely required if you're going to try to track client payments, mostly because every carrier pays a little bit differently. Some carriers like Anthem like to pay based on the percent of premium paid. Some other carriers also like Anthem, they like to pay a few different ways, pay by per employee per month. That's what this pay type column here is used to label. POP is what I use to label percent of premium, and PEPM is what I use for per employee per month payment types. I also have policy numbers listed right here, as well as the line of business of the plan. Now, I use general labels, things like LTD for long-term disability, medical for any sort of general medical coverage. This is just what I use to kind of label things, but if you want to get more precise with that, you absolutely can. You can say like this client is enrolled in like Plan A for MMO or Plan B or, you know, this or that. It's just useful if you're going through a an actual statement to have these things labeled because it helps you pull out information. The other thing I have included, which I highly recommend including, is the effective month. This is the month that the policy became effective. And I always use the first of that month, even if it's like, you know, it came effective the 15th or something like that, because that helps me know what the first month of payment should be or when I should start tracking things. I also have the general premium information listed for percent of premium policies, as well as the standard paid rate. I have it labeled as a solid number here, but it could also be a percentage if you like. In fact, for POP, I'd recommend normally using a percentage. We're using a solid number for this presentation, just to make it a bit easier to understand some of the formulas. Additionally, for our PEPM types, or per employee per month, I have the per sub rate and the per employee per month rate. Using this Humana case as an example, we see it's an LTD case with 5 subs paid at $4 per employee per month, or per member per month, really, for this case. And that gives us $20 that it's going to pay out at. Now, you can use a formula to calculate this paid rate column, and I normally do. I've just copied over all of the information to make it a little easier for you to download and interpret. After that, if we scroll to the right on this, we have every single month labeled in this section. That's January, February, March, April, through December. And the reason I have it labeled this way is every time I get a payment, I'm going to log it for what month that payment was effective. Not necessarily what month that payment was received, but what month that payment is credited for. The reason I do it this way is because a lot of other carriers, Dental Care Plus especially, likes to just pay things out month by month by month and tell you, oh, well, we paid this in January. Oh, well, we paid this in February. but that doesn't necessarily correspond to what that month's payment was for. A lot of times you'll receive a payment in January that's credited back for December of the previous year. And that's what I have everything broken down here to kind of show off. We've got every single month through all of this year. And then we also have an annual expected total, a total amount of money that's been received so far, and a missing amount column. And this is the information we're actually going to fill in on this tracker. So why don't we go ahead and open up our sample data to take a little bit more look at that. I'm going to go ahead and open it up now. My computer's just a little bit slow to open files. So as you can see, we've got a lot of tabs here in this new sample data sheet. We have sample data, which is the original one from our last presentation. Now's a good time to provide a disclaimer. All of the data that I've shown so far has been randomly generated. Any similarity with any carrier or plan information is coincidental, and none of this client policy number or pieces of contact information are real to our knowledge. If it happens to be so, wow, that's really random and crazy. But all of this is fake. So I've just kind of created a short mock-up of the essential information that you'd want to pull out of a statement. We have a carrier, a policyholder name, a policy number, a line of business, pay type, which is included on this but won't be included on any of the subsequent sheets, as well as a payment class, whether or not the client uses tobacco, and their indicated sex. Excuse me. And all of this information I kind of cut down and moved to a working file. This is the kind of essential information that you're going to want when you're working with a commission tracker. That'd be the carrier, the policyholder name, the policy number, the amount paid, the in premium, the amount total paid, if it's a percent of premium payment. You're also going to want the number of subscribers and the payment rate if it's paid by employee per month. You'll also want the payment date, which is the effective date of the payment, not the date you received it, as well as the policy number and, like I said, the line of business. Now, in this working file, it actually is for all of the data, and I've taken the liberty of splitting it up into Aetna, Allstate, Anthem, Humana, Molina, UHC, etc. Now, for each of the actual statements, when you're processing things like this, normally they'll be separate statements, and you'll just manipulate things around to kind of get it displayed in a similar manner to this. You just want to have the policyholder name, policy number, the amount paid, the payment date, and any other relevant pay information all kind of grouped up close together before you start working on things. Now, as you can see here, I'm going to apply a filter. You don't have to do that. I just want to point out something about this data before I continue. If I click down on pay date, I have the year, and then you can see I have January and I have February listed. That means on this one statement, I have payment information listed for multiple months. And if I scroll through, you can see this one is labeled for February, this one's labeled for February, so on and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and actually sort this data, and this is where you'd probably want to start following along. What I'm going to do when I open up my worksheet and once I get things kind of arranged the way I want them looking is I'm going to go ahead and actually apply a sort to that information by the pay date. And typically I'm going to order it oldest to newest. The reason that I do that is because I want all of the payment information for the months grouped together so I know what to place into what column on my actual commission tracker. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look back at my commission tracker worksheet and just get a look at how I've kind of arranged things. As you can see, I have policyholder name, carrier, but the carriers are all kind of mixed together, so are the policy numbers. Now, there are a few different ways that I could work with this worksheet. I could sort things by carrier to make sure that all of the information by carrier is grouped together. I could sort it by name to group all of the names together. But I find that the most effective way to do things is to arrange it by name and then apply filters to filter down to relevant data that I'm actually working with. I'm going to go ahead and filter this information to Aetna because that's the carrier that I'm looking at on my data tab right now. I also have policy information here and line of business information here. And that's going to come in handy next. If I wanted to look through the spreadsheet and copy paste all of the information into January, I could do that. I could copy this policy number from my tracker sheet, go back to my sample data, and highlight this policy number column and hit Control F. That brings up the find and replace function. And if I paste the policy number in there, it'll automatically jump to this LTD case for Bueller Augustus. I could then copy the paid number, go to my sample tracker, and paste it here for January. And I could do that all the way through. That's a very slow way to do it, but it's possible. It's something I could do. The thing that I like to use is actually a formula, and this is where we're going to get into some of the more advanced stuff. The formula I like to use is called SUMIF, and what that does is it actually sums data based on certain criteria. Now, that criteria is listed in the center of the function, and I want to make sure that it just pulls the data that I'm actually looking for. So why don't we go ahead and use it? In order to insert a formula, there are a few different ways. The first way we're going to do is using a function insertion feature in Excel. All I do is I go to the formulas section here and go to insert function. When I click that, it brings up a long list of functions, and it actually brings up the most commonly used functions first. As you can see, it doesn't have the function where I talked about, SUMIF, listed. So I'm going to go ahead and type SUMIF in this top section here, which lets you search for a function, and then hit go. Now it gives me a few different ones listed, and it also gives me a summary down here for what that formula does. For now, we're going to hit SUMIF. Now, this function has three inputs, as displayed by the box. It has a range, it has a criteria, and it has a sum range. But I don't really find those very descriptive. What this is going to do is it's going to use range to look through and find a match to whatever you input in your criteria, and then it's going to spit out whatever number it finds that has a match based on sum range. It's a little easier to understand if I actually enter this function, so that's what I'm going to do. If I click on range, I'm then going to jump back over to my sample data sheet. And I'm going to highlight all of the policy numbers as far as January goes. What I did there is I hit Control-Shift down after clicking on cell H2, and then I just held down the Shift and Control keys while I scrolled up to get back to 1. The other thing you could do to select this is just click cell H2 and drag down on your worksheet to where January ended. And now we have inputs here in this range setting. The next thing we need to enter is a criteria. And after I have my range selected, I'm just going to click on the criteria box. That brings you back to your sample tracker worksheet, and we're going to click on policy number. The policy number that we want right now is in cell C2 because we have cell K2 selected. So I just click cell C2 for criteria. The next thing I'm going to select is actually a sum range, and this is the range of data that we're actually going to want it to spit out. So this would be the actual amount that has paid on this statement. If I go back to my sample data sheet, then I scroll back up and find the paid column. I'm just going to highlight that all the way down to where our January data ends as well, and then click OK. Now it'll show this big long function up here, and it'll also show right over here the number 5. Well, that makes sense. 5 is what we actually copied. But if I click and drag this function down, and I look at what's being copied, as you can see, it's also inserting other numbers. These other numbers, if I click on these cells, as you can see, change the function up top. And it's actually looking through and displaying what information I've asked it to. It's looking for the policy number on our sample data, and it's spitting out whatever matches in column D for that policy number. if there were multiple policy numbers, it would add the amounts in the paid column to the number that it's displaying over here in the January section. Now I'm going to click and drag this all the way through to the bottom of my Aetna worksheet. And then I'm going to undo my filters. Just to kind of show you what happens when you do that. As you can see, each of these cells now has data in it, but none of the other information listed on this worksheet does. That's because it summed every single thing that had a match in January on our sample data and displayed it here in this worksheet. That's probably my preferred way to enter information into a worksheet like this. And you can actually do the same thing for all of these carriers. For Allstate, Humana, UHC, all you'd have to do is apply this filter, select a different carrier, let's say Humana, enter the SUMIF function for January, and go to Humana worksheet here on your sample data, apply our sort and filter, sort things by the month that they're paying in, and then enter that SUMIF function. You can go to, once again, the formulas section here, insert function. If you've just used it, you can find the SUMIF function right here. Enter the range of your sum for what you're trying to match, which is our policy number here. Enter your sum criteria, which is our policy number, like I said. And then enter the sum range, which is going to be our sample data, the actual amount that it paid on that statement for January. As you can see, there was some February information down here. So I'm just going to click where January ended, drag it all the way up, and hit OK. Now it sums everything for January for Humana that was listed on that statement. I drag this down through the rest of January. And now I have all of my January column filled out for Humana. Now, there is one more thing while doing this that I wanted to point out. Other than the fact that this column right here had its border removed, I'm just going to go ahead and reinsert that. And the thing I wanted to point out is that if a policy number is the same for a client and you do this, then it's not actually going to pick up the differences in the line of business. What that means, and I actually have a good example to show of this, why don't you go ahead and select UHC on your sample tracker. If I look through UHC, I have the same policy number for vision, dental, and life plans for this client. If I scroll to the left, as you can see, that's this Bueller Augustus. If I go to my sample data and select UHC and find the first Bueller Augustus line, I have 3 policies, all the same number, with different lines of business. And that means that if I were to do this SUMIF function just based on this policy number, then it actually would sum all of this information together and tell me that I got a total paid of 33.5 for every single line of business. And that's a bit of a problem. A lot of carriers like to use the same policy number for different lines of business. And there's an actual pretty simple way to take that into account, and that's creating an index. So what is an index? An index is a column that you can use to specify a specific line. The way that I do it is I actually combine cell properties to give me an index that works for this sort of function. We're going to call this index, and I'm just going to put a column to the left, the farthest left I can, on this UHC worksheet and call it index to do this. The function we're going to want is actually called concatenate in older versions, but it's called concat in more recent versions of Excel. You can go to your formulas box after you have the cell A2 selected and hit insert function to find it. we're just going to hit concat and hit go. As you can see, it gives us both versions of this function. Concat is the one I'd recommend using if you have it available. And then hit OK. It'll give you a set number of text boxes to fill in after you enter this. You can actually select as many as you want, but for now we're going to do policy number for box 1, click on text 2, and then click the line of business and hit OK. Once we do that, we're going to extend this function all the way down our line by just double-clicking in the bottom right-hand corner. And we've created an index. I'm going to copy and paste values over that column afterward. Just right-click, copy, right-click, and then I'm hitting the one with the numbers to give us our indexing column. What that means is on our sample worksheet for this tracker, I'm going to insert a column to the far left as well, and I'm going to also call that index. We're going to use the same function, which is that concat function, by going to Formulas, Insert Function, Concat, and click on the policy number for text 1 and line of business for text 2. And we're going to do the same thing we just did, extend it down the line, copy, and paste values. It's going to give us an error because we have a filter applied, and that's just something to keep in mind when you're entering a function like this. But if you have a filter applied and then you try to copy and paste values over something, it's not going to work. For this function, it doesn't really matter. We can leave it there and it'll work just fine, but it's just something to keep in mind. Before we go ahead and use our new SUMIF function, I'm going to go ahead and sort this data like I've done to everything else. Just going to Home, Sort and Filter, Custom Sort, and we're going to sort by our pay date. Make sure we don't have any other information, and it looks like we do. Right down here is where January ends. And we're going to go ahead and fill in the SUMIF function here in January now. So you can do it with that insert function, SUMIF, select the range, which is going to be all of the policy numbers on UHC's sheet with January. Except this time it isn't. If you do that, then it'll give you the same issue that you've had this whole time. We're going to actually use the index column this time for our range. And it looks like that's about right. Cell 157. If I scroll over, 157, we have our new range selected. If I then go to criteria, I'm going to click on my index column this time, which is column A, cell 6, because that's what lines up with our currently selected cell, which is L6. And then I'm going to find our sum range, which is sample data again, starting where January ends. We're going to highlight all the way up to this paid column and hit OK. As you can see, now it's giving us our vision for UHC for January is 17.5. And if we look at our sample data, our vision for January, 17.5 for this Buehler-Augustus policy. And if I just double click, well, double clicking won't actually work in this case. If I click and drag all the way down, then it's going to automatically fill that information in as well. And it's going to sort out by line of business. It's a little more complex. It takes one more step, but it's something to keep in mind if you're planning on using this for all of this data. We're going to skip ahead a little bit and talk about how to enter your annual expected total, your total received, and your missing amounts now. You can use that same SUMIF process that I just mentioned, as well as an index column, to fill in the February data, March, April, May, etc., all the way through your worksheet. And you can actually do this month by month. So if you fill out, let's say it's February now and you need to enter February data, you can go ahead and do that same SUMIF function on a select range after you sort your data to enter all of the February information into here, March, April, so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and find our expected total, though, because this is what actually makes this sheet valuable. It'll actually tell you how much you expect for the full year from that case, as well as how much you've received and how much you're missing currently. In order to figure out how much total you're going to make on a policy given a full year, you want to take into account, you want to take into account the policy's effective month. Now, all of the effective months on this sheet are January. So from January to December throughout the year, that's 12 months. You're going to hit equals in the cell you have selected, the total amount paid, times the total number of months that are going to pay in that year, which is 12, and hit enter. And there's your total expected annual amount for that policy. It's just 12 times the paid rate. Now, if this is a percent of premium, it gets a little bit trickier. You're going to have to make sure that the amount here in this paid rate column is an exact correct percent of premium of this premium amount that you have listed. Otherwise, you're not going to get the correct expected total. It gets a little more complex as well for carriers like Dental Care Plus, where they have a stepped percentage scale. You can enter this information, it's just a little bit more complex. And because it's more complex, we're not going to cover it here. But if you have a question at the end of the presentation about how you would do that, I'm happy to show it. Once you have your expected annual total, we're going to copy and paste it all the way down. Or you can click and drag like I'm doing. It'll extend that function all the way to the bottom. Like I said, though, you just want to make sure that all of your effective dates are counting properly. You want to make sure that if something, say, started in February, instead of 12, you're going to use 11. Now, that's the easiest way to enter this annual expected total, but there's actually a better way you can do it. You can use something called the month function. What that does is it actually takes the month value of a formula or a date that's displayed, and it spits it back out as a single-digit value. I'm going to go ahead and type it here in this total received column right now. You don't have to do this, but it's just showing off what month function does. And I'm going to hit equals and type in month. You can access this the same way you've been accessing that SUMIF function by hitting the insert function button under formulas and typing in month to find it. I just find typing this formula to be a little bit easier than searching for it. And now it asks to enter a serial number. What I'm going to do instead is enter in quotes 2/1/2023. Hit enter. As you can see, that spits out the value 2 because February is the second month in the year. It looks at this date, which is 2/1/2023, and says, oh, 2 is the month. I'm going to spit out the number 2. So if we really don't want to look at the actual month that this case is effective, and we want to get a correct annual expected total, then what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to keep the same paid rate as my reference and use parentheses here to kind of tell it to do something first. Oh, sorry, I dropped my notes. But all you have to do is do 13, or actually you would want it to say month, the actual effective month here, that you've got it selected, and then do 13 minus that month amount. I entered that a little bit differently, but you could type this in directly and say cell I6 times the quantity of 13 minus the month function of your effective month. hit enter, and make sure your format here for this column is set to general, and it'll give you the same correct amounts. What it's doing here is it's saying 13 minus the month that it was effective as a number is the number of months that it's going to be effective for. It's a little bit more complex, but it makes it so you don't have to actually deal with figuring out manually what effective month it is and how much you have to multiply your annual rate paid by. After you have that entered, you can enter the total amount that you've currently received. And you can do this two different ways. There's an easier way, which involves less formulas, and there is a slightly more complex way that makes it a little bit easier. And it also utilizes that month function. All you need to do is use a sum function to sum up the total amount of months you're currently in. The way we're going to do that is by going to formulas and hitting this auto sum function here. Now it creates a set range that it's going to sum up, and it's this blue box here. It also has a subtotal of 9 because we have filtered things, but we can actually ignore this. And because we have a filter applied, actually using the formula box is probably the wrong move. We're going to instead hit equals and type SUM and an open parenthesis. So once again, that's equals SUM and then an open parenthesis. Then we can just click on and select the set number of months that we have data entered for. Close the parenthesis and hit enter. Now, one interesting thing about this function is we can actually just have it sum all of the year immediately, because as we're entering data throughout the year, it'll automatically take the total amount summed up here and update it. So currently I have this sum amount listed for L6 to W6. If I just enter 12 in to February, it'll add that 12 to our total received. If I have a new March number, let's say it paid 13, then it also adds that and automatically updates because we've left that function there. I'm just going to take this total received, send it all the way down, and there we go. That's probably the easiest way to do it and actually the way I recommend. However, there is another way. You can actually set it to automatically take the set amount of months that are displayed and have data entered. I think it's a little pointless to do that in this part. I would rather do it for missing, but you can use that month function, as I said, to actually go ahead and force it to select a certain number of cells. I'm not going to actually display that because it looks like we're getting close to running out of time here, but instead we're going to fill out this missing amount, which is the very last part of this sheet, to make it work. The missing amount thing actually displays how much you're going to have missing based on the current date. You can do that a few different ways. You can say, kind of like what I was saying before with the sum, okay, we only have data entered here for like January through March. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another function. I'm going to say equals the total amount paid times the current month it is, let's say March, so 3. And then we're going to take all of that, I'm surrounding it in parentheses by clicking on that function box and adding them in, minus our total received. And that gives us the amount that's currently missing. Right now, you can see we're missing $10 because it's thinking it's going to pay 17.5 for 3 months, and we only have 42.5 total that's paid currently. Another thing you could do if you're deciding to do this based off of what current month it is make it a little more complex. And this is kind of what I was trying to mention before. This times 3 part of our formula is the part that's manually entered right now, but we can set it to do that automatically. How can we do that? Well, we can do that with a nested function. And this is probably the more advanced thing that you could do. What a nested function is it's a function within another function. Using the month one that I displayed previously, I'm just typing it in right now, but you can also do this with the formula box. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. I'm going to take the month value of the day that it is today. There's a function in Excel that does that, which is called today. So I have the day, which is today, with no arguments. We just have to add those little parentheses at the end to enter the function. And we're taking the month value of today's date. If I hit enter, that gives us the same missing amount, 10. The reason it does that is because if I type today as a function, because I have to put the equals in front, then it spits out today's date, 3/28/2023. If I then take the month of that date and hit enter, then it'll spit out the value in year format because it's formatted that way. I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's formatted as a general number, and that gives us the number 3. Now, instead of today, if I say entered the date 5/23, as a date, so we're going to have to put in quotes, then it'll spit out the number 5, and so on and so forth. By entering in today, you're telling it to basically tell you how much money am I missing today. And you can then drag this function all the way down, and it'll tell you how much you have missing. But that's generally how I go about creating these kinds of trackers. If you want, you can get even more complex with that index that I mentioned before, and you can also include the carrier in your index, whatever you decide to label it, and that way you don't actually have to apply any filters at all, as long as you have things sorted. You can just create an index that includes the carrier here, which is C6. And now we have UHC, the policy number, and the line of business. And you can search things that way as well, or use that as a SUMIF index to automatically have all of your information. You could just keep a master sheet of what you've received in the effective month and apply that directly. Something like what we have over here in the working section of our sample data. I'd highly recommend going back and practicing with that to make sure that you've got this entered fully properly. If you have any other questions or concerns, though, I'm happy to answer them now. We're going to go back into our slideshow real quick. But like I said, we're going to go ahead into questions, just some final notes before we do. You're going to want to make sure that you're using the correct premium applied date when you enter these. Like I said before, tracking commission information by the month that you've actually received this data is probably not a good way to figure out if you're missing a month of commission. You'll probably want to go by the amount that's listed for the month that's listed on the actual statement you received from your carrier. Additionally, you can use SUMIF and VLOOKUP to make sure that you've got that information displayed correctly. But you're going to want to make sure there aren't any extra spaces. If you have a space in the middle of your index for your SUMIF, then it's not going to pull. And lastly, you're going to want to make sure that your formatting on all of the sheet, all of the numbers that you're using is correct. That's why I said it might be useful if you're trying to actually use this kind of worksheet. So like I said, if you have any questions, I'm available here now. So is Kyle. If you have any information or questions about that actual sheet that we displayed earlier, the quote request. And as always, I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a great day. We're going to go ahead and have a version of this presentation up online probably later this week with corrected audio from the first half. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.